for this evening's webinar on college majors and the application process includes good practices for navigating this process, insights on majors and their career tracks, factors for students and families to consider, and finally, for many families, University of Texas at Austin is a primary consideration. And so we want to spend a little bit of time talking about the college major process and how it impacts the University of Texas at Austin. Now, some context. We all know that choosing a major is tough. It was tough when all of us were in college. It's even tougher nowadays for students when they go to college. A couple of facts to sort of put that difficulty in context. 61% of grads would, if they could go back, change their major. I think the interesting thing to note is that many of those grads wish they had considered some aspect of return on investment in terms of their majors. And then finally, and I think this is a fact that many families focus on, is that 45% of students currently in a pursuit of a bachelor's degree will take longer than 4.5 years to graduate. And the single biggest contributor to that is students changing major, and not just changing major, but changing majors across different colleges on a university or college campus. For instance, changing from engineering to economics. With that as context, then what we'd like to do now is help orient everybody to some of the key terms. We oftentimes have families ask us, I'm not sure what a concentration is, or a minor is, or a certificate is. These are in many ways the 4 core terms. Students, when they apply, oftentimes are requested to submit their first choice major. And as I think all of us remember from our own experience, it's a structured plan of study that has a minimum hour requirement. A minor, on the other hand, is an optional secondary field of study. Students often can't declare a major and a minor in the same discipline. Now, I want to be clear, not all schools require a minor, and many schools allow students to have a double major. In addition to that, there are some schools that offer what are called concentrations. University of Texas has a number of concentrations, for instance, a business foundations concentration for non-business majors. And then one of the trends that we are seeing is certificates. Programs that are offered to students pursuing a bachelor's degree where they receive a certification of a specific skill set in recognition for employers. So those 4 core terms, major, minor, concentration, and certificate. This evening we'll focus primarily on the choice in front of your student for major. Now, one question that oftentimes comes up because so many families do apply to the University of Texas or to other schools that have what are called impacted majors is, what exactly does it mean if a major is impacted? And the simple answer is, it's a supply and demand question. An impacted major is where there's an excess of qualified applicants compared to the available classroom seats for that major. Now, as a result, colleges and universities can sometimes refer to these as either impacted majors or capped majors. Now, as difficult as this might be for students, colleges are doing this because honestly, when classes overfill, students really struggle to meet their major requirements and they can't attain their degree in the expected 4 years. Now, at many colleges and universities where there are impacted majors, the admit rates differ greatly within departments. And despite the frustration that all of us feel, schools rarely share the major or department specific admit rate. They rarely will state that compared to the overall college or university admit rate, the engineering major admit rate is X or Y or Z. But you oftentimes can expect for impacted majors that the admit rate may be substantially lower than the overall admit rate for that school or university. that in fact it's a much more competitive admit than other majors at that college and university. Now, having set the table, if you will, for the key terms related to majors, let's talk a little bit about where should a student start in their discovery and ultimate choice of a major. Now, in our experience in working with students over the last 11 years, we've come to a fundamental understanding that students need to start with where they are, what their aptitudes are, what their motivators are, and what their skills are. Now, their experience outside of school can really speak to that. But when a student combines those two, it provides for them a compass, a trail map to understand where their aptitudes, where their gifts, where their skills have translated to applicable experience that guides them to consider and research a specific major. Is this a major that will really harness my aptitudes? And do I have experience in the classroom and out of the classroom that confirms that I feel like it's a match for me? Now, once a student has done that work, then they can begin to research the requirements of the major, careers connected to the major, and in many cases, the possibility of grad school. Now, why is this important? Because this, in fact, is a matching exercise where a student is looking at her own aptitudes, motivators, and skills, but then they're also trying to look at the college and universities on their list and try to get a sense of whether or not they match with the requirements of that major. Do they want to take the courses? Does it excite them and energize them? To do some research on the wide range of possible careers connected to that major. And then finally, depending on students pursuing post-secondary, either a master's, PhD, or a professional degree, they're going to want to consider that to make sure that they make a decision that puts them on the right trajectory. Now, why do we feel like that starting with aptitudes is really the right path? A recent study confirmed the fact that more than 2/3 of students who used aptitudes as the guide for their major continued with their declared major through college. Now think about that for a minute and compare it to your own experience and to the age-old statement that students on average change their major anywhere between 2 and 3 times over their college experience. Student interests may change over year to year. Employment trends are constantly changing. But if a student starts with an understanding of their own aptitudes and they use that understanding to guide their choice of a major, the impact is not just short-term, but it's long-term, both in terms of their college match and their launch from college. Now, given that, we do oftentimes work with students and families who say, you know, honestly, I understand all this talk of aptitudes, but I'm going to either just go with what I know or follow my current passion. We use 2 examples here. A proverbial student who has 2 parents who are engineers. They attend a STEM charter school, and they believe that the only jobs that exist are engineering jobs. This might be despite the fact that they don't really have aptitudes, or frankly, they haven't had any experiences outside of the classroom that confirm that that's a good match. Oftentimes we see this with students whose parents are lawyers, doctors, or who have a long generational connection to a specific career. The second trend that we see that is in significant contrast to aptitudes is this constant refrain that students need to follow their passion. Now, it's important. We're not saying that it's a negative for a student to have a passion, but we all know for 17, 18, or 19-year-olds, that passion may shift, change, evolve. And so we always encourage students to bring their passion along with them, to factor in what they know, but to ultimately have those as inputs that go alongside their aptitudes, rather than replacing a deep understanding of aptitudes as the guide for the of college majors. And, I think someone has unmuted themselves. So if There we go. Thanks so much. Okay. So a couple of items to note in terms of trends that we've seen on careers and majors. A note here, we're very aware that there is likely a substantially different landscape for high school students and particularly for college students in terms of career trends and majors now compared to 3 weeks ago. But it is meaningful for us to note that almost 2/3 of the students that we've worked with in the past and currently rated career as the #1 criteria for their major in college. That career readiness, that a sense of connecting to being able to launch into their first career or internship was a primary consideration for their choice of a major and their choice of a college list. Now, what are the trends that we see potentially as it relates to majors going forward? The first one is that we have seen over the last several years a real focus from students and from colleges and universities on students developing skills and students having portfolios of their work. This isn't just for artists or creatives anymore. This can also be for software developers, individuals that have worked on projects, students that have been deeply involved in public health or public policy, where they're able to show during college the actual outcome of the work that they've done. Now, we also see a career trend likely accelerating, and that is that this time and the COVID-19 virus may accelerate a shift to majors related to science and medical fields. And the reason I've linked this, and I'll share in the follow-up note, is this month we've shared an entire blog post on pre-med and some of the myths and misconceptions on first choice major as it relates to pre-med. If the anticipated shift to majors related to science and medical fields does take place, then it's super important for students to do their research and understand which of those majors might best match them with both their aptitudes and, frankly, with the preparation for the potential career that they're interested in. Now, earlier we talked about certificates and gave a definition of that. We do think that many students may begin to look to the college experience as an opportunity to develop certifications that confirm skills in addition to their classroom and out of class work. And then finally, we feel, and we've already seen that with the work with students even in the last week virtually, that discovery and choice of major seems to have already become an even more crucial decision for students. We've found students over the last week, as we meet with them on Zoom, double down on their efforts to really research and make sure that they find a major that best matches their aptitudes. And we found students really come back and look at career trends and the fit to career, not just the fit to major, in terms of their own experience and to gain a sense of confidence. We've also seen some students use this newfound free time to really dive deeper into that research. Now, one thing that we want to state is that college is not simply an exercise in utility. It's not simply an exercise in optimizing yourself as a candidate for a specific job. And in fact, employers continually say that they're looking for college grads that have both hard skills related to a specific major or career, but they also want soft skills. Students who have the ability to think critically, are strong communicators, have exhibited leadership or grit. And we find that students have the opportunity to develop these skills during high school. In fact, we've seen, even in response to the COVID-19 crisis, a number of students really get creative in developing some of these skills in their own communities, online in communities with their school or other environments that they're a part of. And it certainly is heartening to see so many of these students respond to a crisis of this scale with so much creativity and a commitment to the broader community that they're a part of. A note for parents about students as they develop these skills. It's important to encourage a student to plan, to monitor, and most importantly, to memorialize these skills. What do we mean by that? We feel like first that an activity plan is an important way to harness all the excitement. A student may have a fabulous idea, but he needs to break it down to step 1, step 2, step 3, and to be ready when step 4 becomes more difficult and he might have to double back and do some additional work. 2, as a parent, it's helpful to, as a parent, look at the student's progress. We've talked in the past about a growth mindset, encouraging students to build on their own success and growth as opposed to a fixed mindset. And so you don't want to monitor most likely in a way that forces stress, but there are opportunities to monitor and encourage students' progress. And then finally, we've talked a lot about portfolios on this webinar. Students have the opportunity to memorialize these skills. We've seen some students who are computer scientists build GitHub profiles to memorialize their software coding skills. We've seen some students build simple websites on sites like Squarespace or Wix to keep track of not only the projects they've worked on, but the soft skills that they've developed. Now, after Aptitudes, where do I go? We strongly encourage students, starting as early as freshmen in the process, but certainly students who are juniors and still grappling with choosing among majors or still discovering majors, to talk to individuals that have had that career. A recent Gallup study showed that 35% of students would have selected a different major if they had had access to adults in that career area before they chose their major. Now, what does that mean for parents? What that honestly means is that parents will be the point of connection for their students to talk with adults who are currently in that career area. Now, it may sound ironic, but living in a world right now where so much communication is facilitated with tools like Zoom, students have a great opportunity to spend 30 minutes interviewing in an informational interview via Zoom. Now, a comment here. This can be challenging for many students, which is why we've developed a guide to informational interviews. And that guide includes a worksheet. We've articulated a set of sample questions, and over the last 3 years, we've seen countless students work through these questions and seen really, frankly, revelatory outcomes for students to hear individuals in careers that they might be interested in and identify whether or not that matches what their hope for major and career experiences are. In our follow-up note from this, we'll include a link for both the guide to informational interviews and this worksheet for students to use as a cheat sheet, if you will, in those informational interviews. We found that after a student has one of them under their belt, they feel increasingly comfortable. And for students who are particularly anxious, we're certainly open to do a quick virtual mock informational interview to help them gain confidence. Now, the big enchilada, the big Lone Star steer. What about UT Austin? Many of you have heard that first choice major is a significant consideration at the University of Texas at Austin. And what you've heard is true. The first choice major, which is part of the Apply Texas application, each student applying to the University of Texas at Austin will be asked to define their first and second choice major. And that first choice major is the cornerstone of what is called the UT Austin holistic process. Now, that sounds like a complicated inside baseball term, so let's unpack it for a minute. UT Austin is unique among many schools in that they are hungry to know everything there is to know about a student. They not only want to see their transcript and test scores, but they want to read the 4 essays that are required for UT, the 1 long and 3 shorts. They want to read their resume, and in a minute we'll talk about that in detail. They want to read the letters of recommendation. Frankly, they're hungry to read everything, and then think of that student holistically. Think of that student 3-dimensionally, and really try to work to understand and see that student through the lens of that first choice major. Now, why is that? Well, frankly, University of Texas has the student's best interest at heart. They want to make sure that the student has a deep understanding of the major she's chosen. University of Texas and their admissions department can view that on the student's transcript. How well did they do in science courses if a student is choosing a science major? They certainly can view that in test scores. In a minute, we'll talk about the essays, and they oftentimes can view that in the letters of recommendation. And so we really want families and students to understand that in some ways, there really is no experience of applying to the University of Texas at Austin. Instead, you're applying to your first choice major, and your entire application, a student's entire application file, is a case for that first choice major. Now, let's talk about a couple of components of that case. The first one is the expanded resume. Now, I have to note here, for most parents, the term resume is the most confusing thing in the world. Think of this instead as an inventory of all the students' meaningful activities, starting in the summer before their 9th grade, all the way through when they submit their application, and in some cases, after they submit their application. Now, some families always ask us how much is too much, and our reaction is to say, start with everything. Inventory all the activities that a student has been involved in that might be remotely relevant to their potential major at the university. And what we mean by everything is not just the classes, the extracurricular, the leadership activities. We also understand that there are special skills that a student may have developed. Travel may be a pertinent issue for students who are considering majoring in global relations. And so what we really say to families and parents, particularly those who are in hiring positions, is to not think about this as a resume per se, but instead to think about this as an inventory of activities that are relevant to the student's potential major at the university. We have a formatting tool that we work with students. We're excited that the majority of juniors that we work with, your kids, have already completed these, and in the next couple of weeks, we'll be receiving resumes for you to review with them. These are Google Docs, so they're living documents that a student will update. And what we always try to point out is some of the basic data that the University of Texas is looking at. They're looking at the scale of the involvement, the years that the student did that activity, and how many hours per week or week per year that they were involved. Now, it's not to say that the University of Texas only cares about internships where the student has spent 36 hours, but they're less confident that a student has experience if they did an internship that only really was 1 hour. Now, on the left side of the slide, we have an example resume for a student, Jacqueline Smith. I want to note this is a completely made up student, and we mocked up this expanded resume based on experience we have with students who applied, in this case, to engineering. You'll note that after her awards, the first thing we focus on in this formatted resume is the experiences she has that are related to engineering and STEM. And just as important as the actual statement of the activity and their role are the bullets under it. Now remember, on many applications, the student will be able to input the single statements of the activities that they've been involved in, a core set of activities. But the University of Texas is super interested, not just in the what and the role, but the how. And so they oftentimes will state to a student that not only did I see that you were involved in that internship, but that it was a competitive program. In this case, they were selected by the program. And what they actually did as a part of that process, that they actually discussed barriers and strategies for success as female engineers, that they were involved in engineering projects at their high school, and what was the outcome of that. So what you see on this resume in some ways is a presentation of both the hard skills and the soft skills that the individual had utilized and experienced in that process. Now, this is a synopsis of a deeper dive of information that we utilize with students, and it's also a synopsis of a blog post that's available broadly on our website for all students. We think the first step in the holistic process that oftentimes confuses families is the expanded resume. And in our experience, it's the most important place to start. In some ways, after the transcript and the test scores, this can lay the foundation for the students' essays and their strategy as it relates to their first choice major case. Now, another component of that first choice major case is the short essay. Now, the University of Texas requires a longer essay that is more a description and reflection of the student themselves, but they also historically have required 3 short essays. These are the essay prompts as they currently stand. And what you see here is the 3 short essay prompts. And the one I want to focus on is the first essay prompt. Why are you interested in the major you indicated as your first choice major? This is the clearest indication that the University of Texas is asking the student to make the case for their first choice major. They couldn't be more direct. Now, if you put yourselves on the other side of the table from a UT admissions office standpoint, what they're interested is not simply, wow, I really want to be an engineer. And I don't think any smart student would approach this by answering it in that way. But instead, what they're looking for is a considered, specific response that gives the University of Texas an understanding about why that student is a match to their first choice major. And I know this can be daunting for a student as they consider applying to UT, particularly if it's at the top of their list. And it's why we place such a huge emphasis on research and articulation of major, and why we really encourage students to make sure that they have ample experiences in the classroom, but even more importantly, outside of the classroom, that they're able to show as an indication of their fit to first choice major. And I can't stress this enough. The word interest can sound passive. What we really encourage students to understand here is to communicate fit. And that fit comes from the student's own experience, the student's initiative, the student's involvement, and in some cases, particularly for competitive impacted majors, even the impact that the student has had in a field of study that they feel like best indicates their fit to their first choice major. Now, in addition to this short answer prompt around major, this past year, UT had 2 additional prompts: the leadership prompt and the opportunity for the student to contribute and enrich the learning environment at UT Austin. Now, one of the reasons why we spend so much time with students on strategy is because they're gonna wanna think about which stories to tell in which essays. you can well understand that no admissions leader wants to read the same story in the long essay, short essay number 1, short essay number 2, short essay number 3. And so it's crucial that a student strategize on where different stories can have the greatest impact. We'd also like to note that there are some majors at the University of Texas that require specific essay prompts, for example, nursing. And again, those essay prompts are even deeper indications of a student's fit to major. So again, the 2 items that we really encourage students to focus on as part of their fit to major story is the expanded resume, and it's where they should start. Students well know that we've spent countless meetings with them over the last several months, helping them craft and make choices about their expanded resume. And then for students, after they've completed their long essay, the Apply Texas A essay, to really dive deep into the 3 short answers, and as it relates to fit to major, to really make their case in that short answer 1, in terms of the response to the prompt, why are you interested in the major you indicated as your first choice major? Now, the University of Texas is one of many schools that offers a sensational resource for students to research and dive deeper into majors. It's called Wayfinder. You can find it on the UT Austin website. It is a rich resource for students to research, to understand possible majors, to understand careers related to that majors. UT has done a phenomenal job, so much so that oftentimes, even with students that don't have UT on their list, we suggest to students that they use Wayfinder as a first stage for research. We'd encourage you to consider encouraging your students, if they haven't already, to spend a little bit of time on Wayfinder during this period to either confirm their choice or to do more discovery. It does a fabulous job of describing the majors at the University of Texas, and it is constantly updated with interesting majors that the University of Texas at Austin has offered. Now, we know that many families have heard the urban myth that I can game the first choice major system, that my student might not get into this major, so I'm going to have her choose this major, which is less competitive. And we urge families not to do that for 2 reasons. One, it is a poor commitment for your student. It is a choice for them to spend 4 years studying a discipline that either doesn't match their aptitudes or doesn't prepare them to launch out of college. And 2, it is rarely, if ever, an effective strategy. The University of Texas at Austin admissions office is well aware of students who consider a side door in terms of a major. They consider the fact that I can't get into Macomb, so I'll choose this major. I can't get into Cockrell, so I'll choose this major and hopefully transfer into a competitive major or department. UT is very transparent in saying your best choice of getting into an impacted major is as an incoming freshman. And because their admissions rubric, their holistic review, is so tightly focused on fit to major, they're well trained in making sure that students don't game the first choice major system by trying to present themselves as a match for a major that they in fact don't match with at all. Now, what can you do from here? How can major choice impact your student right now? We do have some parents of freshmen and sophomores on this call. We've already been working with you and your students to help a first choice major guide their activity plan. We're well aware that the COVID crisis has really thrown a wrench into those activity plans. Students have spent hours planning their summer, and that is one of the many things that's up in the air. But a major choice can really help guide a student's activity plan, not just in terms of applying that choice, but deciding between a number of different majors. A student may try an internship, a job shadow, a pre-college program, a project, and they may gain a confirmation that that major fits them, or they may realize that is not a good fit for me, and I think I'll shift to this major or considering this major. Now for juniors, a first choice major can really help determine a college list. If a student understands her first choice major, it helps us to identify the schools that best fit that major criteria, as well as other criteria like learning style, affordability, other items that help determine a student's college list and assure that it matches to the student's criteria and that it provides a compelling, balanced opportunity for the student. And then the third way that major choice can impact your student is in terms of directing choices on essays and applications. We spent a good amount of time on this webinar talking about the University of Texas, and they're not the only school that prioritizes first choice major as part of their admissions evaluation of a candidate. And so whenever we start our work with a student on essays and applications, major is almost the starting point for that strategy and consideration of essay topics, and will make up a large guide for the application itself. Now, what I'd like to do is stop the screen share for a minute. I know there are a couple of questions that have come up as we've gone, and I'd like to encourage folks in the chat box, if you'd like to share your question. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to share them now. We can handle them now, or we can handle them as a follow-up. But what I'd like to say is, if you have questions, we've got a couple of minutes left, and we have the chat box open. Jamie, thanks so much earlier on for letting us know that the speaker window was covering the slides. But does anyone have any questions based on what we've covered here this evening? No, okay. So next steps that we'd simply like to share. The first one is a simple reminder that we've added these two events in April, the Q&A session and the UT admissions webinar. And as always, we're so grateful to be able to walk this trail with you and your students. We know that this was a stressful trail to begin with, and the COVID-19 crisis has only made it more stressful. But we find ourselves at this time so grateful for the trust you put in us, and so appreciative every day for the creativity and the excitement we see in your students. We do have one question that a parent has asked, and that is, what kind of activities can one do during this crisis for a business major? Now, we're well aware that this is a super challenging time for students interested in all majors to consider. We have seen students dive into projects as meaningful as their local neighborhood, making sure that shut-ins or those with difficulties have all the provisions they've needed. We have seen some students with specialized skills in either data science or software engineering actually dive into projects related to that. I do think it's challenging sometimes with specific majors, and our encouragement to all students is twofold. One, start with where you are, the communities you're involved in, the impact you've had, and see if there's ways to use technology like Zoom or to use opportunities to work online to deepen those connections and to share with that community your own skills. Just today, I talked with an individual at a high school outside of Austin who's a chair lead in her orchestra. She's organized band rehearsals on Zoom. Now, certainly they have problems with synchronizing, but they're able to spend a little time with one another and really be reminded of what they bring to the process. We fully expect that once the crisis clears, there will be a whole host of opportunities for students to be involved. But we really encourage students to start with where they are and make sure they become as involved as they possibly can safely in having an impact in the communities that they're a part of. We are super appreciative of you taking time out of your busy schedules to join us this evening. We hope that you and your family continue to stay well, that you do everything you can to make it through this crisis and this process. And we are so grateful for the opportunity to work with all of you and your students. Thanks so much, and we hope you have a great rest of the evening and a great rest of the week.